Good evening. There is a discussion in many sources concerning something enigmatic in the beginning of our Parsha, Parshas Truma. Vayidaber Hashem el Moshe Leimer, Hashem speaks to Moshe saying, Daber el Bnei Yisrael, speak to the children of Israel, V'yikchu li Truma. Let them take for me a contribution. Let them, in other words, make a contribution for me. Me'eis kol isha sheyidvenu liboy tikchu es trumasi. From every individual whose heart is generous, should you take my contribution. V'zois hatruma asher tikchu me'itam. This is the contribution you should take from them. And he begins the list: zahav, kesef, and silver, gold, silver, copper, tcheles, dyed wool, argamon, telas, shani, enumerating an entire list of materials and items that were necessary for the Jewish people to contribute for the construction of the Mishkan, of the tabernacle, concerning which he will say in a few verses, V'yasuli mikdash v'shachanti b'soichem, let the Jewish people take all these materials, the gold, the silver, the copper, the various types of wools and objects, precious stones, and let them build a mikdash, a sanctuary, v'shachanti b'soichem, and I will dwell among them. Various sources discuss the fact that in the first three verses we have the word truma, contribution, repeated 3 times, which apparently is excessive and unnecessary. Daber el Bnei Yisrael v'yikchu li truma. Let them take from me a truma, a contribution. From every man whose heart is generous, tikchu es trumasi, take my contribution. V'zois ha-truma asher tikchu me'itam, a 3rd time. This is the contribution you should take from them. Why the need to repeat the same term, the same word truma 3 times? The pasuk could have done it in a much more concise fashion. Daber el Bnei Yisrael, speak to the Jewish people. V'yikchu li truma, let them take a contribution. Me'eis kol isha sheyidvenu liboy. From every man who has a generous spirit, you should take zahav, kesef, nechoshes, gold, silver, copper, and the rest of the list. Why the need for truma 3 times? This is a question that is raised already in Gemara and Talmud Yerushalmi, who actually discusses that the 3 times truma was written to allude to 3 different types of contributions. Rashi quotes this Gemara. There were 3 different types of contributions. There are other interpretations and other sources. But this evening I want to present 1 point from a mimer, from a discourse that was written by the Rebbe, the Tzemach Tzedek, in his published in his volume Or HaTorah, the Light of Torah, on this week's Parsha and Parshas Truma, a mimer that begins with the words V'zois ha-truma. In order to understand the 3 trumas in the beginning of the Parsha, the Tzemach Tzedek brings a medrash that is very difficult to understand. The medrash in this week's Parsha, Medrash Rabbi, says, V'zois ha-truma asher tikchu me'itam zahav v'chesef u'nechoshes. The contribution should be gold, silver, and copper. Zok the medrash, zahav zu Bavel. Gold refers to Babylonia. Kesef Zumadai, silver, refers to the Persian Empire. Nechoshe zu Yavan, copper, refers to the Greek Empire. Barzelein ksivkan lei b'mikdash v'lei b'mishkan. Iron is not mentioned, not in the Mikdash, not in the Mishkan. That refers to the last Golos, Golos Edom, the exile that was induced by the Roman Empire. Traced back to Edom, to Esav, who was called Edom, the red one, who lived in the country called Edom. What is the connection between gold and Babylonia, silver and Persia, copper and Greece? So for this, the Medrash quotes the famous prophecy of Daniel, of Daniel, in Perek Beis, who describes to Nebuchadnezzar the Babylonian Empire. The emperor of Babylonia, Nebuchadnezzar, had the famous dream that was very perplexing, and he came to Daniel, and Daniel gave him an explanation for the dream. And when Daniel explains to Nebuchadnezzar the dream in which he saw a tremendous image made up of different parts and different dimensions, and Daniel presented to him the explanation or the symbolism behind the image that the Babylonian monarch, the Babylonian king Nebuchadnezzar saw, he describes to him the top of the image of gold as the Babylonian monarchy. Antu Rosh Dadav, you are the head of the gold. And then he continues and describes the silver part as the Persian Empire, which would defeat and follow the Babylonian Empire. And finally the copper as the Greek Empire, and on the bottom the iron one representing Edom. Thus the Medrash says, Zav, Kesef, and Nechashis represents the three exiles. The exile that was imposed on the Jewish people through Babylonia, who destroyed the first Beis Hamikdash and exiled them to Babylonia, present-day Iraq. The exile continued through the Persian Empire with Achashverosh and Daryavesh and King Cyrus, King Koresh. And then in the midst of the second Beis Hamikdash, there was of course the dominance of the Greek Empire, Alexander the Great, followed ultimately by the Hanukkah story, which transpired during the Syrian Greek Empire. This is Zav, Kesef, and Nechashis. At first glance, it's a very difficult medrash to understand. What is the connection between the contribution of gold and silver and copper to the exile of Babylonia, of Persia, of Greece? On the contrary, the two themes seem absolutely inconsistent. Here we're discussing the building of a Beis Hamikdash. Here we're discussing the construction of the Mishkan, for which purpose the Jews were required or asked to contribute materials including gold, silver, and copper to create a house for the abode. These various empires, their ambition, their objective was to destroy the Mikdash, was to undermine the Mishkan, was to revert the Jewish people to a condition where they did not have a Beis Hamikdash and a Mishkan. And yet the Medrash somehow sees in these very verses an allusion to gold, silver, and copper as a allegorical allusion to Malchus Bavel, Malchus Yadai, and Malchus Yavan. Zok the Rebbe, the Tzemach Tzedek explains it as follows. We know, I mentioned before, the pasuk continues, Vasul Mikdash v'shachanti b'soicham. Grammatically, there is a seemingly grammatical flaw. V'asuli mikdash, they should make for me a Beis Hamikdash, v'shachanti b'soichai, and I will dwell in it, in that home, not in them. There are no plural homes, make one home. So there's the famous explanation that's brought in the Alshich on the pasuk, brought in Reishis Chachma, and brought many places in Kabbalah and in Chassidus. The Torah is not just saying I will dwell in the physical sanctuary, in the physical tabernacle, but v'shachanti b'soicham, equally and maybe more important, is that I will dwell among them. The tabernacle, the Beis Hamikdash, the sanctuary, is only a vehicle, an instrument, through which they can ultimately introduce the presence of the Almighty, the immanence of Hashem b'soicham into their own lives, into their own hearts, into their own homes. If that is the case, we can understand that this whole story of the beginning of Truma, about the contributions to build the Mishkan, it's not just a physical story about physical money or materials being contributed, but also a spiritual journey of the human and Jewish soul towards fashioning his or her life into a home for the divine. And thus, when we speak about V'shachanti b'soicham, Hashem dwelling amongst them, in our midst, in the hearts of the Jewish people, in the past, in the present, and in the future, there are indeed two types of relationships. There are two ways in which Hashem connects to the heart of the Jew. There are two methods in which we build our Beis Hamikdash, our relationship for Hashem. The first, the Tzemach Tzedek says, is indicated in the first pasuk, Daber el bnei Yisrael v'yikchu li truma. Let the Jewish people make a truma, make a contribution for me. Approach every person asher yidvenu libo, whose heart is generous, whose heart is moved. Take from him my contribution. Now there's a new pasuk. V'zois hatruma asher teikchu me'itam. This is the contribution you should take from them. And here we see an interesting difference. In pasuk number 1, he says, "V'yikchu li truma." Let them take for me a contribution. At the end of the pasuk, from each person who is generous, take trumasi, my contribution. It doesn't say truma shali, as in the beginning of the pasuk, v'yikchu li truma, but he still identifies it as my contribution. This is something that's intimately mine. In the next pasuk, it's already plain. V'zois hatruma. This is the contribution. It's not anymore my contribution that belongs to me. Stam glat azay, plain v'zois hatruma. It's a contribution. This is the contribution you should take from them. Gold, silver, and copper. What is the meaning behind this? The meaning behind this is that this actually represents two states of the Jew, and two very diverse states, in fact, two opposing states. The Medrash Rabbi in the beginning of Parshas Truma discusses the words v'yikchu li truma and explains and gives the metaphor that there was a king who had a bas yichida, an only daughter, and it was time for him to marry off this daughter whom he loved and cherished so profoundly, and a prince came and entered into the covenant of marriage with the princess and took the princess to live with him in their new home, in their new mansion. For the king, it was so emotionally and excruciatingly difficult to part ways with his beloved daughter. So he approached her husband and he says, it came the time when my daughter has to get married and I cannot keep her in this home anymore. But on the other hand, I can't be separated from her for too long. I need to come visit, so do me a favor, wherever you take her, wherever you journey together, in the home which you will build for yourselves, build for me kitay nechad, build for me a little room that I should be able to come visit and spend time with my beloved daughter. Zok de Medrash Rabba, gewaldige Wort. We're coming from Parshas Yisro, Parshas Mishpatim, the portions of Matan Torah. Hashem tells the Jewish people, Torah is my only daughter, I love Torah. Torah is my most precious, most intimate item in the world. Nothing like Torah. But I know the time came that Torah had to, so to speak, graduate and evolve. I gave it to you for you to enjoy, for you to live with Torah. But I can't separate myself from Torah. I have to come visit you and the Torah. I need to come see my only daughter. So do me a favor. Wherever you journey in the world, make a place for me. That is why Truma, he says, Va'asu li migdash v'shachanti b'soichem. In Yisrael Mishpatim I gave you the Torah, but I want to be able to follow. I want to be able to visit frequently. V'yasu li migdash, make sure you build a home for me. V'yikchu li Truma. They're making a contribution to build a Mishkan, which is for me. It's a place where I'm going to visit. It's going to be my home, where I will be manifested. I will be revealed, because I want to be together with Torah. I want to be together with the Jewish people. This represents one type of state in Jewish history. This is the time when the Beis HaMikdash stood. This is the time when the Jewish people had V'shachanti b'soicham. Wasn't only in the human heart, it was also in a particular space. In Yerushalayim there was a Beis HaMikdash, a temple in which godliness was revealed, godliness was manifested. That is one state of V'shachanti b'soicham that is alluded to in the first pasuk. V'yikchu li truma, tikchu es trumasi, my truma. Then there comes the second pasuk, v'zois hatruma, this is the contribution. No more do we have a reference to God, no truma shali and no trumasi. So Tzedek brings the famous psukim in Shir Hashirim in Perek Beis. Shlomo HaMelech in the Song of Songs describes, and the Song of Songs was written according to most opinions, the day that the Mishkan was built. He describes two very different states in the lives of the Jewish people. Now, Shir Hashirim was written as a metaphor. We discussed this at length in our class in Shabbos, Yud Shvat, the week of Yud Shvat. We were discussing the verse of Basi Lagane Achaisikala. It was written as a metaphor. And thus every verse in Shir Hashirim lends itself to many different interpretations, many different perspectives, dimensions, and explanations. Here is one. He describes in Perek Beis, Pasuk Yud Beis, Hanitzonim niru ba'aretz, the blossoms have appeared in the land. Eis hazamir higia, the time of singing has come. V'kol hator nishma ba'artzeinu, and the voice of the turtle dove is heard in the land. Hateina chon tefagev akfonim smader nosnu reach. The fig tree has formed its first figs, and the vines in blossom gave forth fragrance. Kumi lach rayasi yafasi ulechilach. Arise, my beloved one, my beautiful one, and go forth for yourself. And then he continues, Yoinasi b'chagvei hasela. My dove is in the crannies of the rock, is in the clefts of the rock, b'seiser hamadrega, hidden within the step. Harini esmarayich. Show me your countenance. Hashmiini es koilech. Let me hear your voice. Ki koilech arev umarich nova. For your voice is sweet and your countenance is kamali. Let us analyze these verses as they are explained by the Alter Rebbe, Lekuti Torah, on Shi Hashirim, as they are explained by the Tzemach Tzedek in this discourse in the Torah, and as they are explained by the masters of Chabad in many a Chabad discourse. There are two states in the relationship between God and the Jewish people, between heaven and earth, between God and humanity. There's a time when Hanitzonim Niru Ba'aretz, when the blossoms have appeared in the land. It's a time of Zamir, it's a time of singing. The voice of the turtle dove is heard all over our land. When the chassan, the groom, says, Kumi lach rayasi, rise, my beloved one, ulechilach, O yafasi, my beautiful one, ulechilach, and go forth for yourself. This represents the state of Yitzias Mitzrayim, of the exodus of Egypt, as well as the state of when the Beis Hamikdash existed and godliness was revealed. There was a blossoming not only of figs but also of spirituality in the land of Israel. There was live vegetation, there was live produce, there was a time of singing and ecstasy. The spiritual music of Yiddishkeit, the spiritual vibrancy of godliness, vibrated through the universe, it vibrated through the hearts and the minds and the souls of Klal Yisrael. This is one state in Jewish history. Then comes a new state, Yoinasi b'chagvei hasela, b'seiser hamadrega. My dove is hidden in the clefts of the rock. It's hidden in the steppe. And the groom begs, Areini es marayich, let me see you. Hashmiini es koilech, let me hear you. Ke koilech arev amarich nova. The Jew is compared it to a yoina, to a dove, what we call in Yiddish a taibala. Dr. Medrash, why are Jews compared to a dove? From all the animals, from all the beasts, from all the behemoths, from all the fowl, from all the birds, there are only few, maybe 3 or 4, who mate only with one partner, and one of them is the dove. The Medrash says in Shir Hashirim, once the dove recognizes its partner and mates with its partner, it will not abandon that partner, that mate, to go to somebody else until it dies. Versus most other animals who can mate with many a partner, even in the very same season, certainly in another season. More than 1 and 2 and 3 and sometimes more than a dozen, etc. The Yoina is unique. Hashem calls the Jewish people my dove because once they recognized the truth of God, they never abandoned them anymore. Even though there were many more mates who seemed more appealing and attractive throughout the years of suffering and exile. The Jewish people are compared like a dove. They retain their loyalty to the Rabbi Shalom. But there's a time when Yoinasi b'chagvei hasela, when my dove's loyalty is hidden in the clefts of the rock, b'seiser hamadrega, hidden in the steppe. There's a time when the Ava, the love of Hashem to the Jewish people and of the Jewish people to Hashem is concealed. It's repressed. It's embedded in the clefts of a rock. Practically speaking, it's a time in a person's life when he or she feels no inspiration, when he or she does not feel readily the presence of God, when he or she's soul is dormant, is latent, is eisgetrickend, it's dry. There's no blossoming season, there's no blossoming of figs, there's no blossoming of vines, there's no spiritual music in the air. It's kalt and finster and schmutzig, it's cold, it's dark and it's dirty in his brain, in his heart, in his soul. Yoinasi b'chagvei hasela b'seiser hamadrega. Darkness covers the earth and darkness covers the inner landscape of the human soul. These are the 2 psukim in the beginning of Truma, Zakt Tzemach Tzedek. Pasuk number 1 in the beginning of Truma. V'yikchu li Truma. There's a time when the Jewish people sends the li, take from me Truma, to build me a home where I can be manifested. We're talking about a person whose heart is on fire. Yidvenu libo, sagt the Ramban, nidvas halev. His heart is moved to contribute. This represents a hisoirus, there's a passion, there's an inspiration, tichvas trumasi, when he gives his contribution, when he learns Torah, when he davens, when he observes mitzvahs, when he gives tzedakah, he knows it's trumasi, it's my truma, it's a keli, it's a vessel for the divine. Kalish hashayidvenu libo, it refers to avodas halev. Zog the Gemara in Tainis, va'avadetem es Hashem alekechem, v'chalavavchem eze avodas shebelev zu tefillah. What is avodah in the heart? It's the avodah of tefillah. There's the famous expression of the Frierdiker Rebbe in the Maimarim of Slichis. Avodah shebelev is in hearts and mitten hearts. The avodah of davening is in the heart and it's with the heart. Avodah shebelev zu tefillah meyes kalisha sheyidvenu liboy. This is a Jew who davens and his heart gets on fire. His heart is aroused. Rishafer rishveyesh aleves yutke, as it says in Shir Hashirim. Sula Mutzavartza, it says in Zoya that the ladder of Yaakov Avinu in Parshas Vayetzi had 4 steps, corresponding to 4 sections of davening. Davening is a Sula Mutzavartza. It's a ladder that's standing on the earth, but V'royishim Agiya Hashemayim, at the top of the ladder, he reaches heavens. So this is a Jew who's Isha Sheyidvenu Libo, he's in a state of Avodah Shebelev. This ladder may be down here, but V'royishim Agiya Hashemayim, thus he can sense V'yikhu li truma, trumasi. There is still a difference. Bayis Rishon and Bayis Sheni. V'yikhu li truma represents the Giluyim, the revelations of the first Beis Hamikdash. That's the li truma. Tikhu es trumasi, without truma shali. The main expression is on the truma trumasi. This refers to a lower level of the revelation of godliness. Bayis Sheni. Tikhu es trumasi. Now there's a new pasuk. V'zoi satruma shetikchu meyitam. I stand corrected, I made a mistake. Both v'yikchu li truma and the tikchu es trumasi refer to the state of after Yetzias Mitzrayim and Bayis Rishon. I stand corrected. V'yikchu li truma and tikchu es trumasi refer to Yetzias Mitzrayim and the time of the revelation of godliness in the Beis Hamikdash. Now we come to the next pasuk. V'zoi satruma shetikchu meyitam. There's another time when Jews are called to contribute to God. There's no feeling of truma seed. There's no feeling of v'yichuli truma. It's just plain truma. This is the time when they don't feel the presence of the Ribbono Shel Olam in their heart or in history or in their land, in the political landscape of their life, or in their personal, psychological and spiritual condition. On the contrary, now we'll understand the Medrash. Zav kesef u'nechayshes, zav zu bavel, kesef zu madai nechayshes e yavan. What they're experiencing is galus, what they're experiencing is exile, what they're experiencing is the churban of Beis Hamikdash. So Parshas Truma was written for 2 states. There's the one time when they're going to build a physical Mishkan and a physical Beis Hamikdash, when godliness is going to be manifested. But there's another one, V'zoi satruma, you may not feel the Trumasi, and you'll still build a spiritual Beis Hamikdash, V'shechanti b'soicham, although you're dealing with Golus Bavel and Golus Madai and Golus Yavan, gold, copper and silver, whose ambition and whose raised in the Etra and mission statement is to destroy, to undermine the Beis Hamikdash, to demonstrate in the world that lays din v'lays dayan, that there's chalila, there's no Ribbono Shel Olam, there's no morality, there's no ethics, there's no human accountability or responsibility. This is a new stage, this is a new challenge that even then the Jew is called for to make a contribution and to create from his or her lowly heart, overtaken by the forces of Bavel, of Paras and of Yavon, still the ability to fashion from that heart of Beis Hamikdash, v'shechanti b'soich. How does one do this? How does one approach it? Zok the Tzemach Tzedek. This is what the pasuk is really telling us in the continuation of these verses in the beginning of Parshas Truma. Comes a time when you don't have the Yidvenu Liboy. The Jew doesn't feel. You don't feel. You don't feel moved, you don't feel inspired, you don't feel uplifted. On this the pasuk says in Parshas Bereshis, it's not good for man to be alone, I will create for him a help against him. Taich the Alter Rebbe in Lekutei in Torah Parshas Bereishis Lo Toiv Yoyis Adam Levadei. Hashem did not want that the other Ma'alya in the supernal man, the Rebbeinu Shalom, should be alone in a state described by Moshe Rabbeinu as Atar Eitzel Adas Ki Hashem Hu Elokim Ein Oid Milvadoi. There's nothing else besides He. Lo Toiv Yoyis Adam Levadei. Hashem did not want that he should be Levadei. Eseloi Ezer, I want to help him out. I want to help out the Adam. How? Kinegdoi. Through the opposition, through the Kinegdoi, through the opposition is created the Ezer. This is true, first of all, in a regular marriage, in a regular relationship. Sometimes a husband receives the greatest assistance and help from his wife, kinegdoi, when she opposes him, when she disagrees with him. Sometimes he can become his greatest enemy. His own fear or his own ego or his own shame or his own temper can eclipse his vision, his lucidity, his serenity. And if he has the courage to listen to his wife who disagrees with him, Aseloi Ezer, you want to be helped, Kinegdoi. Take the opposition with grace, with courage, with dignity, instead of getting angry, instead of hollering, instead of screaming and insulting. Reflect on it. Perhaps her position and her perspective will enhance your horizons, will broaden your perspectives, and will get you to a much deeper place. Just as this is true in the first Adam and Chava, and in every relationship, it's also true spiritually. Sometimes from the Kenegdoi, from the opposition, from the Yetzer Hara, from the evil inclination which eclipses the human soul, which creates the Yoinasi B'chag Ve'asela, our love to Hashem is concealed. From the Kenegdoi is created the deepest Ezer, the deepest help. From the friction against the Yetzer Hara, the friction against concealment, the deepest energies and the deep, profoundest truth of the human soul emerges in its full splendor. Let's go back and see how this is indicated in the Psukim and Shiashirim. Yoinasi b'chag v'yasela, my love is in the clefts of the rock. B'seiser hamadrega, totally eclipsed, hidden within a step, within a hole in a step. Zok di Rebbeinu Shalom Mareini Esmarayich, show me your countenance. Taich the Alter Rebbe in Lekutei Torah Shiashirim, and the Tzemach Tzedek quotes it in the Torah Parshas Truma. Mare in Hebrew means a spiegel, a mirror. The Tzemach Tzedek says it here in Yiddish. Kemoshel, Keinyan ha-mare ha-spiegel, Arini es-marayich, the Rabbeinu Shalom says, show me your spiegel, show me your mirror. What does this mean? Explains the Alter Rebbe, the Balatanya, Vashulchan Aruch HaMeida Dekavart. Usually when we look through glass, you look out a window, you can see the people walking in the street, you can see the cars driving by in the street. The Alter Rebbe doesn't give a mashal of cars, but you can see what's going on through the glass. You look at a mirror, you can't see through. Why? Because it's blocked off. It's blocked off by a block of silver, by a veil of silver. And that does not allow you to see past it. On the contrary, what it does allow you, however, it allows you to see backwards. You look at the mirror, you can see yourself, and you can even see that which is beyond you, behind you, beyond you. Zog the Alter Rebbe, spiritually, what this represents is when your vision is not blocked, you see outside of the window, you can see what's ahead of you, what's lower than you. What happens when your vision is blocked is what's called an Or Chayzer, he says. The light is reflected back. And when it's reflected back, it allows you to see that which is l'mayla, that which is behind you and beyond you. Spiritually speaking, there's a time in a person's life when his or her vision is clear. You're translucent, you're transparent, you're lucid, you're sober. You can see everything clearly. And then there's a time when your vision is blocked by the kesef. Your vision is blocked by the silver. What that allows you to do, the confrontation with the blockage, the confrontation with the fear, the confrontation with the shame, the confrontation with the opposition, allows you to break through and to reach a much deeper level within yourself. A much deeper level within your soul, which is totally beyond you. A place that you couldn't have imagined that you would have reached without encountering these obstacles in life. Anybody who has been through, has had obstacles in life, whether it's in the area of addictions or fear or issues of Avodas Hashem, and they had to fight the opposition, they reach a place within themselves that they themselves couldn't have imagined before. Areini es marayich, weis mir de spiegel. Literally, it means, Shlomo HaMelech says, Moshcheni, draw me. After you, I will run. Taishta tzamach tzedek moshcheni acharecha narutza. Mishcheni acharecha narutza. From my neighbor, my shachein. We all have a neighbor within ourselves. Our soul has a neighbor. Who is our neighbor? Our neighbor is the famous Yetzer Hara, the famous negative inclination. So he says, Mashcheni, Mishcheni, from my shachen, from my encounter and my battle and my conflict with my neighbor, from there, acharecha narutza. Because the Yetzer Hara can create a momentum, can create a catalyst, can create a springboard for a thirst and for a yearning for an arutza to Hashem Yisbarech that one would never be able to have without that position, without the mirror, which allows you to see things in a much more profound way. The thirst of my soul precisely is aroused from the fact that I am in a parched land without any water. And this is the meaning of V'zoi satruma shetikchu meitam zahav v'kesef v'nechoshes. Tzemach Tzedek says what Hashem is telling the Jewish people through Moshe Rabbeinu is this. It comes a time of V'zoi satruma. You don't have truma si. You don't have li truma. It's a time of golus. It's a time of exile. And you're trying to build a v'shachanti b'soicham, but you don't have a yidvenu liba. It's a new type of truma. It's a new type of contribution filled with obstacles, apathy, coldness, a lack of inspiration. So he says, V'zoi satruma, I want you to know what this contribution is. Zahav v'kesef v'nechoshes. Comes the Medrash and says, we're dealing with Golus Bavel, and we're dealing with Golus Yavon, and we're dealing with Golus Madai, and we're dealing with Golus Yavon. So we explained that this is a time of exile, and that's when you're trying to contribute. Now the Tzemach Tzedek takes it a step deeper. V'zoi satruma. Do you want to know what the contribution you're giving is? Zav v'kesef v'nechoshes. It's your very encounter with the forces of Babylonia, politically or psychologically. It's your very encounter with the inner or outer forces of Persia. It's your very encounter with the inner or outer forces of Greece, through which you create this truma eseloi eze kenegdoi, the ezer from kenegdoi, hareini es marayi chashmiini es koilech, the mara that comes from yoinasi b'chag v'yasela, that comes from yoinasi b'seiser amadrega. This is dissolve the gold. The Alter Rebbe writes in Tanya Perek Nuni, discusses in Perek Mamdalet and in Perek Nuni discusses Mailas Hazav al Kesef, the value, the greatness, the superiority of a love that is compared to Zahav, to gold, versus a love that's compared to silver. One is a fiery-like love, one is a water-like love. One has the color of gold, that red fiery color, that's an avakaish. One is an avakamayim. So the first thing he says, through the encounter with Bavel, through the encounter with that position of Bavel, what can it generate? It can generate the holy gold, a love that is like gold. Through the encounter with Persia, a love that's like silver. Through the encounter with Greece, a love that is like nechoshes, like copper. Which is like the Medrash said in Parshas B'Shalach, Upare Hikriv. Pare is coming closer, so the Medrash, Pare Hikriv, es Yisrael Avim Shamashamayim. Pare made the Jewish people come closer to Hashem. The same is true here, through the Zav and Kesef and Nechoshes, through our encounter with the Kenegdoi, through the Golus, through the obstacles, through the opposition. If the Jew doesn't fall prey to the spear, if you take the bull by the horns, if you don't suffer from fear or paralysis, and you take on the demon, you take on the skeleton, you take on the ghost, and you do not allow them to define you, rather you use it as a catalyst, as a springboard, to fight and to rise up, then from this you will experience a new type of truma, a new type of love, of Zav and Kesef and Nechoshes. And this is similar to what the Alter Rebbe explains in Torah Parshas Noach. The Alter Rebbe says, he discusses there the pasuk in Shir Hashirim, Mayim Rabim lo yuchlu lechabes es ha'avon ha'haris lo yishtafuah. Great waters cannot extinguish the love, and great rivers cannot overwhelm the love of a soul to the Rebbeinu Shalom Zagdal Rebbe. When we live in this world, there are great waters, tumultuous waves that drown our spirit, that destroy our morality, that drain our zest for life, for relationships, for emes, This is a world in which it's very hard to pursue truth, to live by truth. Mayim Rabim, there are tumultuous waves that wish to drown your ethical dimension, your ethical spine, your neshama. Zog the pasuk, Mayim Rabim lo yuchlu lechabes asava. There's a spark of love that can't be extinguished by the love. And Alter Rebbe takes it a step further and says, take the Mabul. The Mabul drowned the world, and Noach built a teva, Noach built an ark. Vatara ma teva meyal hamayim, the teva was lifted from the water. Explains the Alter Rebbe, what is the way to deal with the tumultuous waves of this world? You must have an ark. Teva in Hebrew means an ark, it also means a word. You must have the word, the words of Torah and the words of Tefillah. They are an ark which will shelter you from the tumultuous waves. A Jew who gets up in the morning and spends time in prayer and meditation and spends time each day and each night learning, taking some time and dedicating it to the words of Torah, he or she is in a teva. You're insulated and you're protected from the tremendous waves that overwhelm you. But the Alter Rebbe takes it a step further and says, lest this person become depressed and melancholy, that when he wants to feel his soul, he can't because he's so indulged in the Mayim Rabim. Vatara ma teva me'al hamayim. Through the water, the teva was elevated so much higher. Dafka, the learning and the davening which comes from the encounter with darkness. Dafka, precisely the spirituality and the avodah shebelev that comes from an encounter with tension, with a confrontation with a real and tough world, has within it a depth, it has within it a maturity, it has within it an authenticity, and it has within it a timelessness from the Yisron Armitech HaChoshech, the light that comes from the darkness. And with this, the Tzemach Tzedek explains another medrash in Shir HaShirim, a gewaldige medrash which at first glance it seems very difficult to understand. The medrash quotes the pasuk in Shir HaShirim, Umidbarech Nava, literally your words or your desert is beautiful. Midbarech Nava. So the Tzemach Tzedek says, the Medrash Rabbi says in Shir HaShirim, Parsha Dalet, Piska Dalet, Midbarech Nava, Hashem said, Churbas Chana, Midbarech, your desert, your barren desert is beautiful. Referring to the fact that the Beis Hamikdash, when it's destroyed, Midbarcha, when it was transformed into a barren desert, no, that's when it became beautiful. And the Medrash continues and says, Amar Reb Levi said, when the Beis Hamikdash was destroyed, Ha'amidali tzadikim, the Jewish people produced righteous people. When the Beis Hamikdash was built, Ha'amidali rishayim, the Jewish people produced for me wicked people. When the Beis Hamikdash was destroyed, I got a Daniel, I got a Mordechai, I got an Ezra, and Daniel and his friends, Mordechai and his friends, Ezra and his friends. When the Beis Hamikdash was built, I got an Achaz, I got a Menashe, I got an Amon. Rabbi Bar Kahana quotes Rabbi Yochanan and he brings a pasuk. Pasuk says in Yeshaya Navi, Roni Yakara Lo Yalada, celebrate a barren woman who hasn't given birth. Pitzchirina, shout out with praise, with singing. Ki rabim bnei shemeim bnei be'ula amar Hashem. Because the children of barrenness, of a state of desolation, are far more than the children of the married woman, God says. What does this mean? What does this pasuk mean? So the Medrash says, Hashem said, Tzadikim midali b'churbana, Yosim tzadikim midali b'binyana. Rabim b'nei shemeim b'nei be'ula means greater are the children who were produced when she was desolate. They were greater than the children produced when she was a be'ula, when her marriage with Hashem was revealed and manifested. Tzadikim midali b'churbana, Yosim tzadikim midali b'binyana. The tzaddikim she produced in the time of Churban are more, greater, deeper than the tzaddikim she produced in the time of Binyan. What does this mean? Zog the Tzemach Tzedek, this is the concept of Yisrin ha'or mitoich ha'choshech. And that's why Yeshaya Navi says, Roni yakara lo yalada. Celebrate barren woman who hasn't given birth. It's redundant. We know an akara means a woman who's infertile. So the Tzemach Tzedek explains, Rani akara celebrate lo yalada for the fact that you are shemema, you're desolate, you're barren. And therefore you might think that your case is hopeless. I want to tell you that the darkness, the barrenness is only there as a catalyst. It's only there as a springboard to create a Rabbim b'nei shemema b'nei meyula. Precisely our confrontation with shemema, our encounter with a state of desolateness in our own souls, in our own spirits, allows the person to reach a place to create a far deeper place within the human soul that comes precisely from the confrontation with Rani Akara Lo Yalada. And this is the meaning in another great pasuk in Sefer Dvarim. Kisiyana li ishtei nashim, if a man has two women, zok the Torah. Parshas Kiseitze, achas ahuva v'achas nua. One woman is beloved and one woman is loathed and despised. V'haya ben abchor l'sniya, but the oldest son was born to the loathed woman, and he might think to himself he doesn't want to give that oldest son a double portion of his inheritance because this son was born to the woman he does not like. So the Torah says, "Lo yuchal levaker es ben ahuva al ben asnua." There's no prominence given to the son of the beloved woman. As ben asnua yakir losis lepishnayim, he must give a double portion of the inheritance to his oldest son, the ben abchor, the son that was born from a ben snua. Comes Chassidus and explains this parsha extraordinarily as a metaphor, as an allegory for many different types of relationships. Number one, the two brothers Yaakov and Esav. Ben Ahuva and Ben Asnua, there's the two brothers Yaakov and Esav. What do they represent? They represent that a Jew has two types of relationships with Hashem. Hashem could be married to one Jew who's called a beloved woman and another Jew who's called a loathed, hated woman. Sometimes Hashem is married to a Jew who's in love with him, whose spirituality is alive, whose heart is aglow with ruchnius, with his slavus, with avodas Hashem. And then sometimes there's the snua, there's the Jew who has issues with God, who's uninspired, who's apathetic, who's cold, who's indifferent, who may be filled with doubts and filled with spiritual challenges. Ben asnua, it's a snua, it's a difficult, challenging relationship. Certainly there's no lost love in this relationship between this Jew and God, but yet this Jew also battles. Hareini es marayich, hashmiyini es koilech, esel yeze kenegdai. Zog the Torah, ben abchor l'snua, v'haya ben abchor l'snua. Who's going to be the ben abchor? It's going to be, who's going to be the oldest son, who's going to get the double portion, not the ben ahuva. The Torah and the mitzvahs that are produced from the ben ahuva child represents the offspring, the fruits that we produce. The Torah and the mitzvahs, the ma'asim tovim that are produced through ben ahuva, pale in comparison to the quality of the Torah and mitzvahs that are produced through the Ben Asnua. He gets the double portion, as the Rachayim says. The Alter Rebbe writes in a Maimer, as one of when Mashiach is going to come. The Pishnayim, the double portion, goes to the Ben Asnua. What does this mean? That the Tzemach Tzedek, there's the relationship between Hashem and the Jew in the time of the Beis Hamikdash. That's when they're called the beloved wife. And then the relationship between the Jew and Hashem in the time of Golus. And that's when they're called the snua, the loathed wife. Eis le'oiv, eis lisnoi, the verse says in Kayel, there's a time to love, and there's a time to hate. The ksiva hafti eschem amar Hashem, the Medrash says in Kayelis on this pasuk. There's a time when hafti eschem amar Hashem, Hashem says, I love you. And then there's another time, Yirmiyah describes, in Perikid Beis pasuk ches, Nasna lai bekoilal kain sneisia. There's a time Chalila when Hashem says, I don't like her, I dislike her. So there's achas ahuva, there's the Jew in the state of the Beis Hamikdash. V'achas snua, there's the Jew in the time of snua when he's hated. Comes the Medrash Rabbi and says, Tzadikim midali b'churbana yoiser mit tzadikim midali b'binyana ki rabim b'nei shemeim m'bnei b'ul, as the pasuk in Yeshaya says. V'haya ben abchor l'sniya, the great tzaddikim were produced from the ben asnua. Why? Because the Ben Asnua creates the Ben Abchor, who gets not only the part of Yaakov, but gets the part of Esav by sublimating the darkness of Esav. He gets as Bchorasi Lokach, Esav laments. Yaakov took my Bchor, he didn't only take his, he took mine. As Bchorasi Lokach, he gets the double portion. Say Yaakov and say Esav, he transforms the deep potential of Esav that fell down very, very low, but really comes from a very, very high place. He transforms that. The sparks that Chassidus discusses as the sparks of Olam HaTorah, the sparks of the world of chaos, that fell down very, very low spiritually. And therefore they appear as an Esav. They appear as a Ben Asnua, but he transforms that, he sublimates it. Yeshli Rav, Esav says, I have Rav, I have the secret of Rav, ki Rabim b'nei Shemema, mipnei biyula shalom Rav. V'Rav shloim b'noyich, this he gets only through the Ben Asnua, the Bnei HaGadol, he reaches the Madrega of Esav, the Bnei HaGadol, the great son. He gets both parts, Yaakov and Esav, what we call Toyu and Tikkun, the world of Toyu and the world of Tikkun. So Machzedek goes on to continue. It continues how this is also explained in the Hemshech of the Parsha. The Jewish people here are demanded to contribute 13 things of the Medrash Rabbin Shirashirim. The Kala brought into God 13 things, and the Chassan brought into the Kala 13 things. Famous Medrash, Yichnis lo yud gimel dvarim, v'yichnis lo yud gimel dvarim. The Jews are called upon here to give 13 things. As the Tzemach Tzedek, why 13? Because precisely in the time of Golas they aroused the Yud Gimel Midas Harachimim, the 13 attributes of compassion, B'rachamecha, Rabim Rachim Aleinu, that comes through a confrontation with the darkness, which in turn creates the reciprocity of the Yud Gimel Midas Harachimim, and thus you have the V'asu li Mikdash V'shachanti B'soicham, a different type of V'shachanti B'soicham. It's not the same truma like in the beginning. It's a different type of truma, but in many ways it's a much more powerful. Through Bavel, through Paras, through Yavon, there's a new type of Avodas Hashem, a new type of Zav and Kesef and Nechoshes. You have what he says later, Shemen L'moyer, and Psamim L'shemen HaMishcha, the oil to illuminate, and the psamim, the shemen hamishcha, the incenses, to create the shemen hamishcha, the anointment oil, which represents, as he says, the giluyim, the revelations of Mashiach, who about him, it says in Yeshaya, ve'irichei be'yiras Hashem. He will be able to smell, he will be able to have the psamim and smell Yiras Hashem. The point being that the v'shachanti b'soichim that is created in Galus creates even a deeper type of Asul Mikdash that will be revealed when Mashiach comes, a combination both of Yaakov and Esav, of Toyu, of Tikkun, of the highest and of the lowest, of L'mayla Meishtalshalus, which is the source of Esav, but fell very low, and he sublimates it and he transforms it. This is the second Madrega of Truma, the third Madrega of Truma, in the second condition, that in the darkness, Harenius Marayach, Hashmiinius Koilach, Koilach Arev Amarech Nova, not only is there hope, not only is there comfort, not only is there solace, but here is actually the opportunity to create the deepest revelation and the deepest explosion. Yisrael Metoicha Choshech, may we be zoiche to the revelation of this B'karev Mamish. I want to conclude here the shiur. It's in the middle of the shiva of my dear grandmother, my mother's mother, who passed away last Thursday night. Moras Luba Alta Taibul, spoke about Taibul, Ayoina, Basra Bezriel Chaim Baruch Shalom Lipsker. And since it's the middle of the shiva of my grandmother, so I want to conclude this shiur by sharing a few short episodes about my grandmother, who passed away last week at the age of 94. Last Thursday night, a few minutes after the conclusion of a wedding of her grandson here in Brooklyn, and she was interred the following morning, Friday morning, a few feet away from the Ohel in the Montefiore Cemetery in Queens. In pouring rain, hundreds of her descendants, Bli Ayin Hara, Kein Yirbu, bid farewell to my grandmother, who lived literally a life of selfless Mesiras Nefesh and dedication to family and strangers. 94 years of endless chesed and tzedakah, of emunah and of mesiras nefesh. My mother shared with me a few days ago. They lived in Kutayis in Georgia. In the 1930s, this is. The Soviet Union is, of course, dominated by Stalin. And the decrees against the Jewish people and against Judaism was at its peak. The previous Lubavitcher Rebbe, the Rebbe Rayatz, left Russia after being incarcerated and almost sentenced to death, Rahman al-Islam, and then converted and liberated. He left Russia in 1927. My mother was born in the mid-30s, and she told me that every single night, when her and her siblings were about to go to bed, their mother, my grandmother, Zechrona Livracha, as she would put them to bed, they said together every night the following prayer. The Eibishter soll geben, am sollen sich sehen mit den Rebben. Hashem should help that we should see the Rebbe. Now to pray then realistically to see the Rebbe, the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe, was far less realistic than if I were to tell you, I'll see you tomorrow morning in Baghdad. Or I'll see you tomorrow morning on the moon. For a person to leave the Soviet Union in those years was unheard of. There were unique cases of individuals who could leave Russia. The majority of people were stuck behind the Iron Curtain. Millions were sent to Stalin's gulag or shot. My grandfather, my grandmother's husband, was also arrested because he was keeping Shabbos. He had a sewing factory and he closed it on Shabbos, and one of the employees informed upon him and they arrested him. And yet every night they wished and they used to pray that Eibishter soll geben, soll sich sehen mit den Rebben. And this was a prayer inculcated in the hearts and minds of the children growing up. From the youngest age, my mother told me this was the nightly prayer that Eibishter soll helfen, soll sich sehen mit den Rebben, although it was absolutely unheard of and unrealistic. Talk about confrontation with darkness. Talk about Zav and Kesef and Echoshes, which we discussed above. In 1946-47, after the end of the war, they left through the Soviet Union on false Polish papers. In 1948, it was from the few families who made it to New York. And in 1948, in Tovshin Ches, the whole family, a mother and a father and 6 children, the 6 that were born at that time, there were another 3 born later, went into the Rebbe. The prayer of years and years behind the Iron Curtain, the Eibishter soll helfen, soll sich sehen mit den Rebbe, and it happened. They went into the Rebbe, they were standing there. My mother told me the Friedrich Rebbe was sitting with his spodek, although it was the middle of the week. His beard was white, totally white, and his face was aglow. He looked like, to quote her, a malach Elokim, like an angel of God. And he looked at them. And the whole family together made a bracha, Shechiyanu, Baruch Atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam, Shechiyanu v'kimonu v'giyanu l'zman hazeh. When the Rebbe heard that, he responded and he said, the truth is that when I see such a family who came out of Russia, and I see this family here today, I should be the one making a Shechiyanu. When they came out of Russia, on the way to America, they were in Paris. In 1947, the Rebbe, the son-in-law of the Frierdiker Rebbe, came for a few months to Paris in order to welcome his mother, Rebbe Tzimchana Schneerson, who left the Soviet Union and arrived in France, and to prepare and organize the papers which would allow her to emigrate from France to New York to the United States. The Rebbe was there for a few months. Shabbos and Yom Tov he would eat with his mother, but all week he stayed in a hotel. Where did he get food? So my grandmother was the only person whose food he ate in the hotel. My grandmother told me she used to cook food for him every single day. Or almost every single day. And my grandfather, Rabbi Yankel Lipsker, had the schus to be meshamish, to serve the Rebbe during those few months in Paris. He would go to the Rebbe's hotel with the food of my grandmother and give it to the Rebbe, and the Rebbe would eat it. He came every day to his home and he gave him the food. My grandmother told me the Rebbe said he wanted particularly on the menu there was a lot of eggs and fish. And the Rebbe once told my grandfather that he has a liking to fish because it says in Kabbalah that the souls of tzaddikim are reincarnated in fish. It's interesting, I usually don't hear of people who develop their appetites based on Gilguli Neshamas. Once my grandfather took a loan from the Rebbe and he came to give it back. It was a lot of dollar bills. And it was Mitzvah Shabbos, and he came back with a pack of bills and gave it to the Rebbe. So the Rebbe told him and said two things. Number one, on Mitzvah Shabbos, you're not Mesader Chayvus. On Mitzvah Shabbos, you don't pay back loans. Number two, he told him, in Lubavitch, taf al zay mit haseder. In Lubavitch, it's demanded that everything should be with structure and with organization. $1 bills have to be in one section, and 5s in one section, and 10s in another section, and 20s and 50s and 100s in another section. Not only that, they should be in the same way, either face up or face down, while in Lubavitch, taf al zay mit haseder. Life needs to be structured and organized, is what he told them. My grandmother told me that she was once on Yechidus by the Rebbe, and he asked her about one of her sons, my uncle Zalman. And the Rebbe asked her, by wem lernt er, by whom is he learning? And she told the Rebbe, sein Rebbe is, his Rebbe in Yeshiva is, and the Rebbe interrupted her and said, mein sein Melamed. You mean his Melamed. Our Rebbe is Nareiner, our Rebbe there's only one. Have a wonderful evening.